Access, May 10, 2024. Hashtag Flip the Power Dynamic in Autism Research and Funding. Dr. Shannan Palma.
Hi, my name is Dr. Shannan Palma, and for those who cannot see me, I am a middle-aged white woman with long black curly hair and black glasses. I am autistic and ADHD, and I move and fidget constantly when I talk. I have officially been diagnosed with overly animated facial expressions, which I didn't know was a thing, but apparently it is. It is written in my report. My title slide has the logo for the nonprofit organization I co-founded and co-direct, the Autistic Self-Reliance Support Network, or ASRSN. It also has the title of today's talk, Flip the Power Dynamic in Autism Research and Funding, and my name and affiliations. In addition to my work with ASRSN, I am also the founder and CEO of ITI Assistive Technologies, Inc., which you will learn more about in a few minutes. Now, other titles that I've had or hold, I should say, include writer, editor, professor, founding faculty director, board member, vice president, emotional support human for multiple rescue animals, foster parent to 2 neurodivergent human children, and avid amateur gardener. 1% of the global population is thought to be autistic. There are around 6.9 million autistic folks in the US, 81% of whom, and that is more than 5.4 million, are autistic adults. Now, this slide shows a pie chart emphasizing how many more adults there are than kids. It's about a 4-to-1 ratio. And all those kids, if they survive childhood, are going to become autistic adults. So they're going to join that population. Autism is seen through an ableist lens as a massive problem to be solved. There's a $4 billion autism industry in the US trying to solve that problem and citing estimates of the high societal cost of autism and autistic people. The largest autism-focused charity in the United States, where I am based, is Autism Speaks, which is still a major perpetrator of this problem narrative. And pretty much every autistic self-advocacy organization has asked them to just step back. And they have not. So only 2% of research funding goes towards lifespan issues. So that means anything 18 plus, only 2% of research funding is looking at that 5.4 million autistic adults and helping them. And 6% goes towards services. The rest is really focused on, and this is what my slide says, caregivers and cure. And by cure, I mean the effort to find and eliminate the cause of autism. So as a consequence of the services gap and the research gap here, autistic adults have a shorter lifespan, much higher suicide rates. The suicide rates for autistic women are 13 times higher than non-autistic women. High and underemployment rates, a trust gap between the experts studying autism and those with lived experience, many barriers to adult diagnosis, and a lot of political straw man arguments about whether, quote, and this is, I'm using the language we don't like, the high functioning folks are taking away needed resources from the low functioning folks, when the reality is those labels don't apply in any kind of meaningful way. They're about whether your access needs are visible to others or not. And also, there's no resources for anyone. So there's nothing to be fighting over. There's no resources for autistic adults unless they are already diagnosed with a co-occurring condition. So that is something that gets a lot of headlines, and that doesn't actually, it's not a problem that exists. And for our children, a recent study showed higher IQ predicts greater suicide risk. So non-speaking and dyspraxic children often lack access to communication of any kind and are twice exceptional. That's, again, the label given in the literature. So that just means folks who have both disability and are labeled with high intellect or increased above average intelligence, they encounter higher expectations and even fewer supports And as the psychiatrist that sees my foster son told me, nobody wants to put autism on a chart anymore because it will impair adaptability. So those twice exceptional kids, that is a major barrier and contributor to the suicide rate for adults. The current state of autism research and funding is a wicked problem. There are a ton of moving pieces and major inertia tied to outdated, ableist assumptions and approaches. There's no straightforward solution, but many autistic adults have insights into our needs that could help our struggling peers and be invaluable to parents and caregivers supporting children. However, autistic adults aren't a lucrative market under capitalism. Like, we don't have a lot of money because of that underemployment rate, and there are major barriers to our participation in the kind of research that motivates insurance to pay for services or governments to enact inclusion policies. So the ASRSN team have varying experiences with this problem based on our intersectional identities. We are a very diverse team. We determined that we would need to implement an ecosystem approach and develop a complex interconnected system to address this problem. And our solution is basically just to center the priorities of people who live with the condition. And that's what my slide says. So first priority is sustainability, title slide. So we decided we needed to secure sustainable funding and special interest gardening. That is one of mine. So I was looking very much at gardening for inspiration. Successful species co-evolve as ecosystems in order to thrive. The resources we need are systems of support and the money to make those systems reliable and sustainable under capitalism. So I kept thinking about terrariums, closed jar gardens that recycle water and air in order to thrive without outside input. And we wondered, could we create a closed ecosystem and recycle our resources? So this slide shows our ecosystem approach. We decided to create a for-profit company to make assistive technology and use the profits from that company to subsidize access and direct services supporting positive well-being. Basically, we decided to move money from those of us who are able to access it to support those of us who can't. This diagram shows ASRSN is the parent org and the trustee, parent organization and trustee. It provides assistance, education, builds community, and conducts research and advocacy around what we're talking about today, flipping that power dynamic. ITI, our subsidiary, creates assistive technology to support autistic well-being and then recycles the revenues back into the community through grants to disability-led organizations and projects. Our second priority, and the reason I am at this conference, is access. A closed ecosystem isn't a long-term approach, it's triage. It's a starting point for building our community's capacity to explore and grow. We need to make sure that self-advocates can access the conversations that happen before research projects are approved and grant funding is distributed, which means taking a hard look at science in a historical context. So we identified 3 barriers. The first is inaccessible language and ahistorical context. So academic jargon, complex sentence structures, the assumption of a common knowledge base. Academia is a long conversation over centuries between people both living and dead. It's like joining a conversation in a language you barely know halfway through and being expected to catch up. There's mention of previous and subsequent revisions and contradictions and interventions people have made. And none of it's clear if you're just reading an article. It just seems like, it can seem like gobbledygook. So I have begun working on the Self-Advocates Glossary of Autism research with Dr. Angela Willey of UMass Amherst, who did fieldwork in a neuroscience lab that was working on autism and the, quote, monogamy gene. So we are working on a plain language, open source overview of concepts and terms in autism research that will live on the web. The goal is to provide context and clarity for the current status quo so that advocates are better positioned to advocate for themselves and intervene and talk back to this research. Another barrier is that so much of scientific research is published behind paywalls and requires that you have to have a university affiliation to access it. And the quote on my slide is that fees for publishing outside of paywall can be as much as $12,000 US for a single article, which is crazy. So with buy-in from the community, we will use ITI to create, that's our for-profit, to create the largest graph database on the autistic lifespan ever, and then hold it hostage. So researchers who want to access it will have to get their research design approved by our advisory board, all autistic, ADHD, cross-disability solidarity people, and then convince users to opt into their project. All resulting publications must be open access. So we are working very hard to create a system where research on autistic lifespan issues, all of that is happening, but also is open access. So it's a continuous conversation. And then the third problem is embedded violence. The traditions of science and scientific writing position the scientist as the agent and the person with the condition as an object of study and experimentation. And I can tell you, like, I am a trained researcher, and reading the research on my own condition is so emotionally violent. This is a quote on my slide from the founder of ABA, who, which is applied behavioral analysis, the gold standard for autism treatment. And it says, I let her know that there was no question in my mind that I was going to kill her if she hit herself once more. And that was pretty much it. So basically, psychological torture as a cure or as a way to decrease self-harming behaviors, that's not better. So reading this literature can be really, really hard. We propose we have to fundamentally change the way we approach researching human variation to prioritize insights from lived experience. And for that, we turn to the model of the Japanese anti-psychiatry movement, Tojisha Kenkyu, and I apologize for my pronunciation. And that's where people with a condition study themselves individually and collectively, and then professional researchers, many of whom are Tojishas themselves, apply their scientific training to figure out the underlying causes or dynamics. So this is what we eventually hope to have an interdisciplinary research center living out of ASRSN, supporting Tojishas and studying oneself through communication with others who share similar experiences. So you didn't imagine it, we are staging a coup. ASRSN is working on increasing mobility and communication autonomy, increasing measures of positive well-being, and lowering the suicide rate for autistic adults. ITI is working on decreasing decision fatigue and paralysis, and just got a grant for $390,000 to demonstrate our collaborative approach to research will work. So I'm so sorry because I took up almost my whole time with that. But if you have any questions, please let me know. And we invite you to join us.
Thank you so much, Shannon, for that fantastic talk. We do have one question in the Q&A from Adrian asking for any suggested websites or books to read.
It depends on your perspective, what you're looking for. Neurotribes is a really good overview of kind of the history of autism research. Then I Will Die on This Hill is a wonderful conversation between autistic adults and parents of autistic children about some of the ways that conflict is manufactured within our community and turns families against people against each other, but also what we would like each other to know. Those are generally my top recommendations.
Thank you. And would you mind putting the names of those books and media into the chat just for anyone that didn't catch them?
I will.
Great. Thank you so much.
Sci Access. Learn more at www.sciaccess.org.